before the break, we had three contributions looking at a consumer voice within the regulator, and we had three different sectors experience. We had financial services, we had communications, and we had civil aviation. Now we're going to have three presentations on a consumer voice outside of the regulator, and again we're going to look at three sectors, this time water, energy and transport. So we begin with Alan Lovell, who is Chair of the Consumer Council for Water. Big welcome to Alan, please.
Thank you very much, Roger. Right. So, who are we, first of all? Some of you know extremely well, but we are independent consumer body, England and Wales, formed 10 years ago. Interestingly, we were up to that stage within Ofwat, so we do have a little different perspective on this point about inside or outside the regulator. We are specialists in water. We operate through 4 regional committees in England and a committee for Wales, and those are an integral part of our close relationships with the water companies. And you all generously contribute to our wherewithal with a vast sum of 21p per customer per year. Excellent value from which you get a great large multiple of that in return. What do we do? Very largely research-based. We do all we can to listen to customers through a very comprehensive consumer research program and through social media. We help customers, and I should stress both domestic and business customers, by taking up their complaints if they are not readily resolved by the companies. We provide them with advice and information, and where we can, we influence the agenda. And it's all about placing consumers at the heart of decision-making within the water industry. I am new to this, so I can say that I think we have played, along with the industry as a whole, all players in the industry, I think that tremendous progress has been made on that over the last 10 years or so. Consumers are genuinely at the heart of decision-making in the industry, but we'd still like to go further. And just to give you a quick indication of one of the areas that we look at, consumer complaints, and our job here is very much encouraging the companies to deal with complaints themselves and indeed to reduce the number they receive. And you see here in blue the total written complaints to companies, and in the red the ones that we get involved in. And both over the last 8 years have shown a dramatic improvement. A bit of a stall over the last year, if I'm honest. There were 2 or 3 specific instances that caused that, related to a change in billing in 2 or 3 companies. But it does remain a question how much further we can go in improving the service in this area as a sector, and a challenge for how the industry evolves in order to take the next step. What have we done? The question in the last section about how do you measure what you do? Well, I think it's probably relatively easy for us. We have seen the consumer voice heard, but some specific numbers. We've dealt with a considerable number of complaints. We've actually generated, in compensation and rebates in one form or another, over 20 million in our 20 years. And we have pressed hard on social tariffs. Affordability is a big issue for us, and one of the areas which we are mandated to work on. 19 of the 21 water companies now offer social tariffs, and indeed the other 2 plan to introduce them from April 17. And we have been very involved in the work related to the opening of the market from April 17. Non-household customers will be able to choose their retail supplier, and we have been very involved in that process. So the big question, by comparison with where we are now compared with where we were in Ofwat, could we have achieved as much? And I think there is a pretty clear answer to that we have achieved much more from being outside. First of all, in consumer representation, those who are around say to me that the consumers service was a Cinderella service in the days when we were within Ofwat. It was never going to be their top priority. On complaints, I think the graph that I showed spoke for itself. Research is probably the most important area. We have been able to engage in research which we think is important for consumers, whereas previously it tended to be what Ofwat wanted to see. Companies really value that, and we often work with the companies indeed to increase the sample size so as to make it even more meaningful for them. And particularly on price reviews, clearly here we are in constant debate with Ofwat. We would never have been able to commission consultants in the way we do now in order to test Ofwat's assumptions, to review the work, their proposals, what they think customers want, and we would never have been able to be as critical as we have been, particularly on what we see as Ofwat's over-generosity. Some companies in the room will no doubt disagree with me on that, but I think over time it is fair to say that water companies have done pretty well in the period since regulation. And indeed, the Public Accounts Committee has just found that. We have been hot on the case and will continue to be in a way that would have been very difficult if we had been within the regulator. Now, are there any downsides? Yes, I think a couple are worth talking about. One is that we do not have any legal powers in respect of customers' complaint. We talk to the companies, we suggest, we cajole, we encourage them. Unfortunately, they are all equally inclined to deal with customer complaints. So I think it is a more theoretical limitation than a real one, but nevertheless, there is a point there. And the other aspect in terms of policy, and I think this does contrast with some of the points that the previous round of speakers made, is that we are quite late learning about policy. We are not engaged in the creation of Ofwat policy. We are a bit separate, and therefore we tend to be given the opportunity rather late in the day, and research is often more rushed than in an ideal world it might be. The other interesting aspect which links on to the next group is our relationship with customer challenge groups. Now, these were in existence prior to 2005, and indeed CC Water in its prior guise was instrumental in setting them up as quadripartite groups with the Drinking Water Inspectorate and the Environment Agency. But we suggested that they should then expand. We chaired many of the customer challenge groups in the previous round of price review, but we found that gave us less strong a consumer voice than we felt we should have, and therefore we backed off that and now are not chairing any of them, but we are engaged in all of them. And I think the relationship between the customer challenge groups and CC Water is something that we're still working on, to be honest, and it will be very interesting to hear that perspective in the next session. So what are we on at the moment? And just to give you a very brief view of some key points, and I think this just to give you an idea that the big issues within water at the moment are the opening of the non-household market, early stage discussion about the possibility of also opening the domestic market, on which we have expressed some fairly clear views, not always in the direction that Ofwat have been seeking, which is a point relative to what I was talking about earlier. We play a very important role in respect to vulnerable customers, I mentioned. And a key part for us now, and increasingly so, is on resilience, taking a long-term view, and the intergenerational issues. How much should we spend now as opposed to in our grandchildren's time? So some very important areas in which we are delighted to be part. So just to conclude, I personally think that although I mentioned a couple of minor disadvantages, I think the detachment from the regulator is really important in enabling us to give a truly independent representation of customer views. I think it's vital that we are specialists in water and real experts in policy there. I think this future role in resilience and intergenerational fairness is something that is very important now, and if anything will increase. And if I may say so, I think that some of the results already achieved represent a fair view of CCW's position. Thank you.